And we're back for episode 2.10. Our episode begins with Tyrion waking up after his battle. Now in the book, Tyrion has a chapter-long dream about death and destruction. It shows that on some level Tyrion feels very, very guilty about killing all of those people in the Battle of the Blackwater. Here he is visited by Pycelle, who mocks him a bit, but Pycelle never visits him in the book. Although he does have a vague memory of Tywin, Cersei, Littlefinger, and Varys visiting him. The maester that ends up treating him is Maester Balabar. Now next we have the celebration of the Lannister-Tyrell victory. Now as in the book, Littlefinger is granted Harrenhal for his services. This is of course the same castle that his crony Janos Slynt had been given, and the same castle that Tyrion had offered him earlier in the season. Whatever Littlefinger is planning, Harrenhal seems to be central to it. Now here Loras asks Joffrey to marry Margaery. In the book, there are two more Tyrell brothers. There's Willis and Garland. Garland was a huge hero in the battle. Based on Littlefinger's advice, he put on Renly's armor and pretended to be Renly's ghost in the battle. It's Garland that asks Joffrey to marry Margaery. Loras asks to be part of Joffrey's Kingsguard. And Joffrey accepts. In the book, Margaery isn't even there. Now Joffrey has a problem. He's betrothed to Sansa, and marriages and betrothals can only be undone by the High Septon. Now here Pycelle says he's talked to the High Septon and it's all cool. In the book, the High Septon is at the ceremony and tells Joffrey himself. Now here Loras looks kind of upset, but in the book, this is all Loras's plan. In the first book, Loras is trying to get Margaery married to King Robert because it seems he knows about the incest. And then Margaery is married to King Renly, and now Margaery is getting married to King Joffrey. Margaery being queen is either Loras's plan or part of Loras's plan. Now Sansa is tickled pink by all this news, but here in the show Littlefinger tells her that she's in more danger than ever. In the book, it's Littlefinger's crony Dantos that tells her this. In the book, Dantos has been telling her for a long time that he's going to rescue her. In the show, they've delayed Dantos' communication with Sansa quite a bit. Now next we get this extra scene between Varys and Ros because there hasn't been enough boob time. Now of course there's no character of Ros in the book, but in this scene Varys tries to get her to become his agent. Speaking of prostitutes, in the Riverlands, Jaime and Brienne come across the bodies of a few. Now as I mentioned before, in the book they have a third companion, Cleos Frey. And it's pretty clear that it's Cleos Frey's entourage that ended up sleeping with these prostitutes. And so the Northern and Riverlander men end up killing them. Now in the book we don't know who exactly did this, but here in the show, the culprits are right around them. And these men seemingly recognize Jaime, and so Brienne needs to kill them. And we get this very puzzling scene where, of course, dicks are swords and swords are dicks, and Brienne ends up stab-raping this guy and having some weird sexual satisfaction to it. Now I will say that Brienne never does anything like this in the book. She is perhaps one of the most purely good characters there is. I couldn't imagine her stab-raping an unarmed man in the groin. And if she did, I couldn't imagine her getting weird sexual satisfaction out of it. Even Jaime seems to think this is a little fucked up. Keep in mind, in the book, Brienne becomes Jaime's role model. She's an example of a true knight. Now next we get an extra scene where Robb is getting scolded by Catelyn for not marrying the Frey girl. Now in the book, Catelyn never has the chance to scold Robb. By the time she runs into him, he's already married. She's mostly worried whether Robb will forgive her for letting Jaime go. When she does find out that Robb has married Jane Westerling, she quickly moves into solution mode, and it's her idea that Edmure will take Robb's place. Meanwhile, over on Dragonstone, we get this extra scene where Stannis is angry about losing and takes it out on Melisandre. Here in the show, Stannis has lost faith in Melisandre's powers, so she has him stare into the flames for a while. Now in the book, we have little idea what Stannis is up to at this point. Davos is our perspective, and he's lost at this moment. Stannis does eventually become a Flame Watcher, but not until much, much later in the story. Meanwhile at Winterfell, Theon is completely surrounded by northern forces. In the book, these forces are led by Ser Rodrik, and there's a very intense scene where Theon goes out to treat with him. Theon has control of Rodrik's daughter and puts her in a noose. He tells Rodrik that he'll kill his daughter if they attack. Of course, it's a big bluff. Theon actually has no plans of killing her, and he knows that Rodrik will attack anyway. He's simply hoping to buy himself some time. And as in the book, Luwin suggests that Theon join the Night's Watch. In the book, internally, Theon actually thinks this is a really fantastic idea. And he's about to say yes, and then something happens, and we'll talk about that in a second. Here in the show, Theon rejects Luwin and decides to die in battle. His men decide to betray him, knock him out, and then kill Luwin. Now in the book, things go very differently. Theon's men are all loyal and are willing to die for him. However, Ramsay, posing as Reek number 2, said he could bring him some extra men if he let him go. And so Theon does so, thinking why not. Ramsay returns with thousands of Dreadfort men who slaughter Rodrik's men, Theon's men, and Luwin. Now next we get an extra scene where Tyrion is visited by Varys and Shae. Varys once again strokes Tyrion's ego, and Shae takes a look at Tyrion's face. In the book, Shae is still off serving House Stokeworth. And here we see Tyrion is given an awesome battle scar rather than having his nose chopped off. Meanwhile in the Riverlands, we get this extra scene where Robb is getting married. Now if you notice, Robb is getting married in a Faith of the Seven ceremony. It's very clear that the marriage between Ned and Cat involved a faithification of Winterfell and the Starks. A sept was built in Winterfell and a septon was put in place. A septa was there to educate the children, and Ned even thought that Bran could become High Septon. The only child that seems to have been raised with the old gods is Jon Snow. Meanwhile, across the Narrow Sea, Christina Aguilera is like, "Where are my dragons?" She walks around the outside of the tower and then magically is inside. Now in the book, the warlocks don't steal Dany's dragons, but she seeks out the warlocks for help. She finds Pyat Pree hanging out in front of the House of Black and White, and he gives her a hallucinatory drink. Dany taking this drink strongly parallels Bran eating some paste in his cave, and Arya smelling a candle at the House of Black and White. Their minds have totally been opened. Meanwhile in the Riverlands, Arya is leisurely walking away from Harrenhal. In the book, Arya is very worried about being caught, and they ride all night until they start falling asleep on their mounts. In fact, the brave companions do come after Arya, Gendry, and Hot Pie. However, Arya's wolf Nymeria and her wolf pack end up slaughtering them. Otherwise, they probably would have been caught. Now here in the show, Jaqen shows up and tries to convince Arya to come across the Narrow Sea so she can kill the people on her list. Now Jaqen doesn't mention the list in the book, and it should be noted that the House of Black and White tells Arya that personal killing is off limits. But to be fair to the show, Jaqen does a lot of things that are in contradiction to the teachings of the Faceless Men. He steals, he causes collateral damage, and he worries about dying. In the book, this conversation between Jaqen and Arya happens back at Harrenhal. He gives Arya the coin that's been in his rectum for months, and then his face ripples and he transforms into a new man. And this man is next seen in Old Town. Meanwhile at Winterfell, the crew comes upstairs and finds Winterfell burned. Now in the book there's a reason why Bran knows it's safe to come upstairs, and that's because summer is outside. Everyone spends days in the dark, and Bran spends days warging as summer. This very much parallels Arya, who goes blind and starts warging. Now a fairly important piece of information has been deleted about Bran and Theon. In the book, Theon doesn't burn Winterfell, Ramsay does. And Bran very much notices that the Ironborn are innocent of this crime. And of course Bran knows that Theon is innocent of killing him. Now there's only one other person that knows this information, besides Theon and Ramsay, and that's Wex, Theon's squire. In the book, Wex is actually hiding in a tree at this point, watching this entire scene. Why the wolves don't smell Wex is a mystery. So Luwin is dying, and here in the show he tells them all to go to the Wall. Now in the book there's some mystery on where Luwin wants them to go. He tells them perhaps House Umber in the north or House Manderley in the south, but then he has a private conversation with Osha, so we don't know what he says. And then Luwin has Osha kill him. Now it's very clear here that Luwin is being sacrificed in front of a heart tree. This means that his memories and essentially his soul is going to join the werewood net. Bloodraven and the Children of the Forest are going to know what Luwin knows, for better or worse. And now we get to Dany inside the House of the Undying and her having visions. The book has a whole slew of extra visions that the show doesn't have. Now fans spend a lot of time analyzing these visions. I actually don't think they're that important because I don't think prophecy is true. I think prophecy is a trick designed to get humans to kill each other. What's interesting about Dany's visions is how much is wrong about them. For instance, she first passes a room where 4 little men are ravaging a beautiful woman. Now this seems to be in reference to the War of the Five Kings, but why aren't there 5 little men? Because Renly's dead at this moment? Okay, then why aren't there 5 men? Because Mance Rayder is a king. Next she passes a wolf-headed king with an iron crown and a feast of corpses. This seems to be in reference to the Red Wedding, except Robb didn't have an iron crown. He had a bronze crown with iron spikes in it. Next she's greeted by Willem Darry at her childhood home, the house with the red door. Except Dany's only memories of Willem Darry are him bedridden. This one is walking around. The next vision seems to be King Aerys ordering the burning of King's Landing. His reasoning according to the vision is that he wants Robert to be King of Ashes. But according to Jaime, Aerys wanted to burn the city so he would be reborn as a dragon. Next she seems to see Rhaegar, who talks about the prince that was promised. He says that the dragon has 3 heads. However, he talked about prophecy all the time with Maester Aemon, who believes there is only one savior. After these initial visions, Dany then finds herself back with Pyat Pree, who tells her to come with him. She refuses and runs off, and then finds herself with a bunch of regal-looking wizards who claim to be the Undying. They offer to teach her secrets and the speech of dragonkind, but she runs away from them as well. The show's visions are pretty simple. She passes through a destroyed King's Landing in winter, and then finds herself at the Wall. She then finds a Dothraki tent in the snow, and inside is Khal Drogo and her son. And then she gets to the final chamber where her dragons are being held. Now in the book, Dany brings with her Drogon, and he makes all of the difference. You see, in the book, when Dany meets the Undying, she finds they are a hive-minded people. And this, of course, in many ways parallels the Children of the Forest on Bran's side of the world. The Undying souls seem to all be inside a giant purple heart, and they perhaps want to absorb Dany into them. Hive-minded organisms absorbing people into them is a reoccurring theme for our author. Anyway, before Dany can be absorbed, Drogon rips apart this heart and saves her. And in the show we have a similar ending where the dragons burn Pyat Pree up. Though in the show Pyat Pree survives and goes on to have some interesting adventures with the Ironborn. Now in the book, before the Undying die, they send Dany even more visions. They send her Viserys dying, a silver-haired Dothraki, Rhaegar dying, a blue-eyed king and a red sword, cloth dragon, a stone beast breathing shadows, her horse under stars, a corpse on a ship, a blue flower, and a wall of ice. And then they send her shadows in a tent, a girl running towards a house with a red door, Mirri Durr dying, her horse and a naked bouncing man, a white lion running through grass, naked crones, slaves yelling mother. But of all the visions, the one that fans really focus on is that blue flower in the wall of ice. And besides Dany's son, the wall is the only vision that's in both the book and the show. Now, many fans believe that this vision means that Lyanna is Jon Snow's mother through the following logic. Lyanna is associated with the blue flower, Jon is associated with the wall, and therefore the blue flower at the wall means that Lyanna is Jon's mother. Now, of course, the more you examine that logic, the less it makes sense. Why is Jon the wall? There are thousands of people in the Night's Watch, and Jon's not even at the wall when this vision happens. And why would Lyanna the blue flower be growing out of a chink in Jon? And what about the other blue flowers in our story, like Jenny of Oldstones and Loras and Bale the Bard? I'm not going to pretend I know what this vision means, if it means anything at all. But I will say that the title of the book series, A Song of Ice and Fire, is almost certainly in reference to an anti-war Robert Frost poem, Fire and Ice. And Robert Frost wrote another poem called The Mending Wall, criticizing, well, walls. I would say a vision about a chink in a wall with a flower growing out of it probably has more to do with war and peace than it does with parentage. Meanwhile, north of the wall, Qhorin finally goes through with his plan to attack Jon to have Jon kill him so that he can join the wildlings. This seems to be Qhorin's plan in the book as well, but it takes an intense knowledge of the wildlings to know this would work. It shows that Qhorin is pretty darn smart. Remember, in the book, Qhorin had Jon attack the wildling party that contained Ygritte. He guessed that Jon wouldn't kill Ygritte, but he also knew that under wildling customs, Jon has essentially married Ygritte by capturing her. So he figures that Ygritte will vouch for Jon when they run into the wildlings. And sure enough, she does, and Jon says that he'll do whatever it takes to join them. And so Rattleshirt tells Jon to kill Qhorin. Qhorin takes the decision away from Jon and attacks Jon immediately. It's quite an elaborate plan, but it works in the end. Our final scene has Jon staring down on the huge wildling host. Now in the book we're left with a rather large cliffhanger. Jon thinks they're going to head back up into the Frostfangs to find Mance, and Ygritte tells him that no, Mance is already downriver attacking the wall. It's a bit of an overstatement, as Mance is heading down the river to attack the wall. Meanwhile, across the Narrow Sea, Dany is punishing Xaro and Doreah for their treachery. She locks them in a vault to die of thirst, and then steals all of his shit in order to buy a ship. Now in the book, Xaro doesn't do any treachery to Dany, and doesn't die. In fact, later on he appears in Slaver's Bay as an emissary from Qarth. Dany has to leave Qarth because 1, Xaro has finally kicked her out of his palace because she won't marry him, and 2, after the destruction of the House of the Undying, people start thinking that Dany is dangerous. Luckily, Illyrio's cronies show up with 3 ships for Dany, and she's able to leave Qarth behind. And in our final scene, we have Sam hearing 3 blasts for White Walkers. And this gets into our author's fake-out between his second book, A Clash of Kings, and his third book, A Storm of Swords, also known as A Storm of Dicks. When we left Jon, we heard that Mance was heading downriver towards the wall. The next book opens with the Night's Watch expecting a wildling attack. Instead, the Night's Watch is blindsided by whites. While escaping, Sam does run into a White Walker, the one he kills. And that's all for episode 2.10. See you in episode 3.1.